conversation for today. My name is Linda Knight and I'm director of the Mapping Future Imaginaries network. And I'm really pleased to be with Leah Sandler today. Hi, Leah, nice to meet you. I thought perhaps first you might say something about yourself and your work, and then we'll begin the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you for all your work with the Mapping Future Imaginaries network. It's been such an incredible experience getting to get closer to all these amazing projects that consider how we can intentionally build our future in the present. Again, my name is Leah Sandler. I am an interdisciplinary artist and writer. I'm based in Orlando, Florida, which is kind of a fun place to consider climate change and catastrophic futures, as well as kind of envisioning hope and ways around that. I am the parafictional head of preservation programs for the Center for Post-Capitalist History. So that is a project that kind of takes up a lot of my art practice and thought space, really. So the project really fuses together the capitalist-driven present with the archaeology of the future. It proposes a parafictional museum that exists in a future ravaged by climate change and demonstrates kind of the logical conclusion of late capitalism. So that's just kind of a brief intro to me and my work. And I think it fits in a really interesting way with some of the other projects that other artists and researchers are working on in MFI.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. I mean, it so does, and really that kind of leads us into this first question, which is, kind of through your work, how do you kind of imagine these futures? What are your ideas and speculations on possible futures?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely informed by living in Orlando, Florida my entire life. It is a very close to coastal areas that have constantly been affected by climate change, even during my lifetime. I've kind of had water cut out and lived without running water for over a year after a hurricane, and kind of experienced firsthand some of the things that can happen, the interruptions that you wouldn't necessarily expect based on climate change. So that's definitely a big part of how I kind of envision our future. And that kind of, I think, early experience of just these major disruptions of infrastructure that had consequences that wouldn't necessarily be your first thought. So how life could be interrupted by these kind of geological changes that we're experiencing right now. Another thing that's definitely influenced me as I've gotten older is kind of witnessing the huge discrepancies in wealth and who is kind of responsible for the actions that are causing climate change, and then who's going to have to be bearing the brunt of that in reality. So there's a lot of kind of issues of asymmetries in capitalism that I see only really becoming more intensified. Really just 50 miles away, we just had a launch of the first private space tourist flight. So we have these incredible technologies and abilities to, we could be, I guess, gearing technology to help people, but instead the asymmetries of capitalism are allowing it to kind of just be used for this frivolous, wasteful thing. So a lot of what I envision in the future is kind of having to deal with what we're going to inherit based on what's happening now. And it can be a really bleak picture, and a lot of my project does feel very foreboding and scary. But ultimately, I think it's a gesture of hope to have an intentional hand in the future that, instead of just being a cash grab, might consider how to make the world a livable place for humans, how we might be able to kind of carry our histories forward during these catastrophic times.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting where you are in the world, and how it's so, as you say, so close to all those kind of all those events and the kind of stark demonstrations of inequity, particularly through those kind of wealth inequities. But and perhaps at this point you could show us some of the projects that you've been working on, and some of your work. It's so interesting and really will kind of help to exemplify your concepts and ideas, that would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I'm going to share my screen here and go through, the first thing I'm going to show is a video that's kind of an introduction to the Center for Post-Capitalist History. This is a quick one, so I hope you don't mind.
Not at all.
The Center for Post-Capitalist History seeks to develop a methodology of archiving that will survive the strains on preservation faced by our post-collapse world.
Imagine being able to quantify how precious your time is. Imagine an algorithm.
While we are no longer able to actively hold and preserve collections, our efforts are focused on developing alternative modes of recording.
Imagine an algorithm capable of determining the monetary worth of any individual's lifespan with 99.9% accuracy. This algorithm factors in locality, proximity to sacrifice zones, likelihood of experiencing systemic oppression, debt,
and understanding history.
We are working to develop an understanding of history that is sensitive to the environmental, material, and social rigors of our world. We have seen the irrevocable damage inflicted by capitalism's fundamental system of decontextualization and extraction. We seek to broaden our understanding of history and plant the seeds of a better future. We will use the knowledge and tools available within our discipline to reconsider the epistemological violence that led to the acceleration and collapse of capitalism by tearing the discipline apart limb by limb and rebuilding it with intentionality. We are witnesses of the consequences of the mistakes of our past. We recognize that the human scale of time exists within the geological scale of time. We begin with our bodies in context.
This algorithm factors in health conditions, predicted lifetime salary, heartbreaks, invisible labor, transportation, familial obligations, mental health, patterns of consumption, and countless other data points to determine your time value coefficients. We collect a DNA sample and your W-2 and provide you with priceless knowledge. Don't waste another second. Call now.
All right. So that is kind of like the most cohesive place where an explanation of the project exists, really. So that's just an introduction video to the project. It is, again, it's a parafictional museum. So I'm an artist. I'm not actually an archivist or an historian, really. But I am interested in kind of the materiality of those things. And the project has this kind of interesting to me anyways. So foot in reality and 1 foot in fiction. I've definitely been very influenced by research of Carrie Lambert Beatty. She wrote Make Believe, Plausibility and Parafiction in 2009. And it kind of just talks about leveraging the truth value and authority of kind of the visual components of institutionalism and kind of using that to, I guess, intervene in channels of communication that might have higher visibility and higher truth value within capitalism in order to critique it. So that's definitely a big part of what I do. I like to intervene in storefronts, radio shows, and other kind of mass media channels, things that have higher visibility that might not be associated with high art or fine art, in order to kind of, bring these concepts to different audiences. And another kind of node that I like to work within with this project is the idea of interstice. So it's, according to Marx, it's this pocket of trading activity outside of the capitalist framework. So even outside of just what the videos look like and the projects look like, I always work with collaborators in order to create them.
Yeah.
And I usually establish these kind of non-monetary trades to do them. So I've done house sitting, pet sitting, content writing, and all sorts of stuff to work with designers and photographers to make these things. So it kind of exists in multiple levels.
Yeah.
Do another screen share here really quickly, if that is okay. And I'm going to go through some of these projects. We have more time here.
Sure.
Let me know if I start taking too much time. I know I can get a little excited.
It's all good.
All right. So, there we go. All right. So I'm going to show you, this was a teeny tiny photo, but I'm going to zoom in on it. This was back in 2016. This is a project that I did for one of my, she's a former professor and mentor, Dawn Rowe. She curates the Window Reproduction Representation Space in Asheville, North Carolina. And we worked together to create this window vinyl installation for kind of the precursor project to Center for Post-Capitalist History. It's called the Archive of Scarcity. And this was just kind of like a storefront window that gave the illusion of it being this real accessible, like institutional space that kind of had an ambiguous mission. And I did another similar project to that recently for Pancake House in Minneapolis. And this is a Center for Post-Capitalist History staging area. And I did another, zoomed in too quick there. I did another window vinyl that kind of gave the impression of being this ambiguous storefront. And then I had the flag in the video displayed. There's a QR code, so everything was accessible. This was during COVID, so everything was only viewable from the street outdoors. But my idea with this one too is it's kind of the staging area where it gives the impression that it's something that is happening now, that we're currently intervening into the future in the present, was like my concept with that one. And I'm going to show you another project for CPCH that I have recently been able to kind of present to the public, is a field guide to embodied archiving. So this is a publication in the voice of CPCH. It is a piece of parafiction in that it presents itself as being a real guide to this new method of archiving that's kind of based on an itinerant I guess, environment. It's kind of imagining how a museum could function during a catastrophic time. So I did do a promo video for that. Would it be okay if I showed another video? It's a quick one.
Sure.
Very short one. And then I'll wrap up.
You might be wondering, what is this thing? And if it's a field guide, how can it be used? In short, your Center for Post-Capitalist History Field Guide to Embodied Archiving is a thought experiment. It invites you to consider your own body and subjectivity in relation to the writing of history. As a field guide, this publication has a goal of helping you identify your own body as a valuable archive of information. Through this process, your body archive reveals inconsistencies between capitalism's promises of infinite progress and the reality of the unsustainable and destructive nature inherent in its systems of production. Your CPCH Field Guide to Embodied Archiving is aspirational in nature. That is, the theories and strategies contained within are gestures towards an ambiguous ideal. They are suggestions for forming an understanding of history that will allow us to salvage ourselves from the psychological wreckage of late capitalism's fractured and hierarchical subjectivities. No small task. I am writing this from deep within the wreckage.
All right, I'm going to end end my screen share now. And yeah, so those are just some of the projects. I feel like usually what ends up happening is I create little kind of elements that can exist on their own, but also contribute to this kind of larger idea that are specifically for certain channels of communication. So there's been a radio ad as well, videos that during coronavirus, I've been live streaming on Twitch. So it ends up being very flexible and kind of within multiple disciplines too.
Yeah, and that's what I really like about your work, Leah, is the way that it kind of pulls on those different semiotics and kind of really familiar tropes as well of you know, the kind of the authentic science information, you know, the kind of that voiceover for the book, the last video that you just played is very kind of reminiscent of these kind of factual, reassuring, scientific kind of videos and programs that we hear, and it pulls into question, you know, the kind of ideas of beliefs, I guess, around what is authentic, reassuring knowledge, which is really strong in your work, I think. And it also, for me, has a very much a kind of cultural aspect as well of, you know, whose knowledge is centralized and whose science and research is seen as the trustworthy one and the one that will take us forward in this planet, when in fact they're often the ones that have made the destructions happen. You know, so really interesting stuff. So
thank you.
Look, thank you so much for sharing your work. This is people watching this will have opportunity to visit more of your work in the links below, and so but it's been wonderful to have this short introduction to your work, and I just want to say thank you, Leah, and the best of luck with your future projects. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Linda.